I now call this business meeting to order, and it will be followed by a study session. Time 8:20 p.m. All board members are present. I would like to make a motion to amend the agenda to remove item 7A, as there is no plan to approve at this time. Do I have a second? Second. Director France. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 7-0. I will now entertain a motion and a second to approve the amended agenda.
So made.
By Director France, second.
Second.
By Director Smith, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That passes 7-0. First item on the agenda is our business items. Letter B, purchase agreement for the District Service Center. Dr. Thomas?
Thank you, Chair Bullion, members of the board. This evening, we have Zach Cronin, who has been our attorney, working through the details of the purchase agreement, and so he'll be here tonight to walk over the high levels of the PA, very similar to what you've already seen in some of our initial conversations, but I'll turn it over to Zach, who will then walk us through that agenda item.
Good evening. I'll try to be relatively brief. I know you've had a long evening already. So we're here tonight to discuss the purchase agreement for the district office. This purchase agreement is consistent with the letter of intent that the board looked at last month. So after that meeting, we've been working with the buyer, Rohr is its name, and their attorneys and brokers to negotiate this purchase agreement. Overall, it's a pretty straightforward kind of commercial purchase agreement. We'll walk through some of the high-level terms. Feel free to ask questions at any point if you have if you have anything you want to talk through. So just to kind of talk through again, obviously this is for the sale of this building, the district office. Purchase price consistent with the letter of intent, $2.65 million. That's in section 2.1. You know, one area that there was some back and forth on was the due diligence period. So ultimately what was in the letter of intent is a 270-day due diligence period followed by closing within 90 days of the expiration of the due diligence period. So ultimately during that due diligence period, the buyer has the right to do inspections, get zoning approvals. Obviously there's going to be some processes that they're going to want to follow with the city. So that's their period to do that. They'll get to look at title, doing a title inspection. We'll be providing a number of documents to them to review regarding the condition of the building and other matters relating to the property. In 4.5, I'll just flag that we negotiated in some kind of unique language, which I think is beneficial to the district. Because this building is being used currently as the district office, we negotiated in language that acknowledges that and then confirms that we as the district have the right to sort of decide or control if they're doing inspections during the business day or obviously during school board meetings, things like that. So they were totally receptive to that change, but just meant to protect the district to make sure there's not disruptions during the business day. Another piece too is 4.6, land use approvals. So again, they are going to be following a process to get some approvals from the city. This is very common when there's zoning changes or other things that need to take place. So that the buyer often wants the seller to work with them to go through that process. So we added language just to clarify that we'll cooperate with them and obviously help that process, but the extent of our assistance is going to be more or less just signing land use documents, those sort of things with the city. One other piece to flag is this purchase is contingent on the purchase of the adjacent parcel. So they have language in there saying that they can extend the closing by 60 days if they need to sort of time up the two closings together, which again is pretty standard. If you're a buyer, you want to make sure that that one closes at the same time as this one, so you're not left holding one property without the other. Other than that, there's the standard title process that we'll go through. So we'll get a title commitment. They have the right to object. District administration and my office will work through all those processes. So tonight the board would be approving a resolution that approves the purchase agreement and then designates the board chair and clerk to sign, and then Dr. Thomas is authorized by the board to sort of take any steps necessary to get to closing. Any questions regarding the agreement?
Open it up to questions or discussion points.
I just have a question about the due diligence. I thought there was some talk about it saying 207 days or before that.
Correct, yeah. Obviously, if things go quickly, they get the approvals and, you know, we're humming along, we can always agree to close early.
Okay,
So that's
thank
not a hard date, that's like the back end date.
Okay, that's the farthest.
Yep, yep,
Okay, thank you for clarifying that.
yep.
Sure.
No questions, but would just like to say, thank you for the work on this and, you know, the partnership with the city, I think is.
Yeah.
All right, so if there's no further discussion, I will entertain a motion and a second to approve the purchase agreement
So made.
by Director France. By Director Johnson. All in favor?
Aye.
It's a resolution.
Oh, is it roll call? Okay.
Just to clarify with the resolution, some title companies like to see a written document with who's been authorized to sign. Some don't want it, but I always recommend doing it just so we don't have to come back to the board 2 months from now and say, hey, can you reapprove what you already approved? So,
Sure, very good.
thank you.
All right, we'll do roll call. Director Atkinson?
Aye.
Director Johnson?
Aye.
Director Mason?
Aye.
Director Olstad?
Aye.
Director France?
Aye.
Director Smith?
Aye.
And I'm aye. That passes 7-0. I will now entertain a motion and a second to adjourn the business portion of the meeting and transition to a study session.
So made.
By Director Johnson, second.
Second.
By Director Olstad, no, Mason. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? That carries 7-0. We will now adjourn. Next item for the study session is public forum. Are there any speakers tonight, Martha? Okay. And turning it over to Dr. Thomas for purpose and agenda.
Thank you, Chair Boley and members of the board. This evening, we have several topics that we would like to engage the board on for deeper discussion, better understanding and learning for the board. I will share with the board that unfortunately there are a couple of topics that I'm going to request that we postpone either to another date or that we bring it to our February 9th meeting if we can't find a date in advance. One of our team members has been out ill, and so we are going to have to delay the data dashboard on the attendance and discipline. And then, as some of you heard me share in our closed session, we have a building flood, I'll just say a sprinkler water issue going on right now at one of our campuses that Dan Powers and probably many of our team members are addressing. And his portion of this evening is also going to have to get rescheduled because he's on site managing that. So I apologize about that. Obviously, that was very unforeseen, but we got to take care of the building to see what we can do for bringing it back up for school tomorrow. So I would like to make a request, Chair, to postpone 12, I'll just go in order. I would like to postpone 12B, 12C, and 12D until a later date on or before our next business meeting.
Very good.
Outside of that, our team stands ready to have other conversations, talk a little bit about some of our naming conversations that we're engaging the board in for the first time today, something that we'll bring forward into March. And then we'll have a couple of financial topics that we'll discuss with the board this evening, looking at our debt schedule that we talked about at our last board meeting, a long-term capital levy conversation, and then a 5-year projections conversation, along with levy option slides for updating from where we last left our conversation. And that at the end of the evening, this evening, you will get the annual mid-year link with the goals for a qualitative checkpoint for my mid-year evaluation, and that will be coming from Martha as well after the conclusion of tonight.
Thank you, Dr. Thomas. Next up on the agenda is our proclamation for National School Counseling Week. Director France, can you read that proclamation?
Yes, thank you. School Counseling Week, February 2nd through 6th, 2026. Whereas the Prior Lake Savage Area Schools Board of Education recognizes and celebrates the essential role of school counselors in supporting the academic, social, emotional, and career development of all students. And whereas school counselors help students build confidence, develop problem-solving and decision-making skills, and plan for their future by connecting learning to life goals. And whereas school counselors provide individual and group support, collaborate with teachers and families, and advocate for equitable access to educational opportunities for every student. And whereas their expertise and compassion foster safe, inclusive, and supportive school environments that promote student well-being and success. Now therefore, the PLSAS Board of Education proclaims February 2nd through the 6th, 2026 as National School Counseling Week in Prior Lake Savage Area Schools.
Thank you very much. Director of Student Support Services, Chuka, do you have anything to add?
If I might,
Dr. Anderson.
Dr.
on behalf of Director Chuka and our entire district, Madam Chair, in honor of the National School Counseling Week, I'd like to take a moment to personally recognize the incredible counseling team that we have here in Prior Lake. We often talk about, and especially in my case, the what of education. That might be curriculum, it might be standards. But our counselors are the heartbeat of the how and the who. They're the ones who ensure our students are emotionally ready to learn, socially connected to their peers, and prepared to dream about life after graduation. And so whether they're navigating a crisis with a student, helping a senior find the right career path, or fostering a safe environment in our hallways, their expertise and compassion are foundational. And so to our counselors, thank you for your tireless advocacy and for being ready to stand and provide a steady hand that guides our students towards their goals. We're a better district because of their dedication. Thank you very much.
I agree. Thank you very much. All right. Next up, oversight of operations. Dr. Thomas?
Okay, thanks. So the first topic that we'll get into is naming recommendations. So as you all know, and we just took action on tonight with the purchase agreement of the sale of this building. We'll start the process of moving this service center into a co-located site that will house some of our SPED support along with our community education. And part of what we need to do is develop a name for that new site. And so I just wanted to walk through just kind of where we're at in that process. Policy 807 kind of drives that process, and we're adhering to that. But just wanted to share with the board kind of in our community. So the District Services Center component, if you will, we're going to be engaging our Community Education Advisory Council while supporting the naming process and recommendations for the District Services Center. They will run kind of like a community center aspect of the DSC as well, so we're going to engage them for that component of it. La Ola del Lago, similar to what we have it at Greenwood, will keep its core identity as La Ola, but now at Westwood. And so keeping that recognized brand in our community and just keeping the namesake of the current school that it will be housed in. We will be engaging our Special Education Advisory Council as well on some concepts of what our transitions program could embody in terms of its identity and its branding name that would be co-located in some of those spaces as well. And then we will be looking at bringing some of these recommendations and feedback that we're getting from various aspects of our community to our March meeting with the board with some recommendations for you all to consider in terms of what the new building of DSC and other shared services could be named. So I wanted to share that information with the board tonight.
Very good. Any discussion or comments? All right, well, we'll go on to the next agenda item, which is review of budget projections. Executive Director of Business Services, Ryder.
Okay. So I am going to move to the podium so that we can pull up a few of these documents. And I guess, given all the information that is going to be talked about at this moment, I'm wondering if I could ask that everything that's under 12E, if you don't mind me putting it in a little different order when I present it, so it kind of flows maybe a little bit more conducive to conversation. So I'm going to begin actually by updating you on the Pay 26 operating referendum and CPL for the metro area. So just this last week, if you can find that right one. Just this last week, they provided us with an update based upon the most recent elections that took place this past November. And so I'm going to see if I can make this a little bit larger here on the screen down here. Oop, that did not do it. Okay. Let me just close this maybe. There we go. So after the November 2025 elections, there were a few districts that had some questions on their ballots. And so this is reflective of those that may have then passed. You will find when you compare this to that first page we had on the 12th, when we talked about this, that things look fairly similar for us. Unfortunately, the reality is now Watertown Mayor is a little bit higher than we are, and we are next to the last one listed here for the metro area. So I point this out because, the more I prepare this information for you and think about what we need to be considering, the investment that has been made by a number of these communities in their schools is what has helped them to maintain and continue forward during this period of time in which our gen ed revenue formula just does not keep up with the expenditure percentage increase. So if you have, on average, about a 4% increase in expenditures, we have not seen that consistently in our increases for the gen ed formula. So I'm bringing this to your attention again, providing you with that updated document within the packet. And that is listed under 12E2. Next, I'm going to go back over
Ryder,
to.
I'm sorry.
Oh,
Can I ask a
yes,
question about
please.
specific to this slide? I can wait certainly.
No.
But I didn't know if you wanted to go back.
That's fine.
When our levy was voted and improved in 2017, I believe it was, the voters approved 1,097, I believe is the dollar amount, somewhere in that,
Yes.
right? And we then were allowed via the legislature to move $300 or $400 to board approved. So is that the same case with all these other districts?
Yes,
Like
that was-
so basically that's going to be a consistent apples to apples comparison as well.
Yes, it happened
Okay.
across the state. So everybody had that same local operational revenue, I think they call it LOR, that was moved to consistently $300 across the board.
So basically, if we're looking at, and I can't read this far, but if we're looking at, say, Columbia Heights, and there says, I can't read that far, but
Here, let me- oops.
$670 on that first orange line, they would have also had $1,000 approved.
Correct.
Correct?
Yep.
Okay, so like I said, apples to apples comparison, so
Okay,
I just wanted to check on that.
Thank you
And
for that.
Jordan doesn't have a levy?
nope.
Interesting, okay.
I have a question or a clarification also. So this includes the operating and capital levies, but it does not include any bond levy or debt levies.
Okay, so this graph is solely around referendum and capital project levies, correct? It is not inclusive of any bonded debt.
But
Thank you for that.
wouldn't a capital levy be the same as?
No, it isn't. It is instead a tax rate that then is applied on an annual basis and is different from bonded debt where when you sell bonds, you're going to receive that cash up front and then pay that principal and interest off over a period of time.
Okay, yeah, I'm grateful for what Director Olsted told me. Bonds are for building, levies are for learning. So.
Yes.
So the bonds are for building that we voted to approve back in 17, 136-ish million is not included in here, correct?
Correct.
Okay.
That is not.
I think it would be helpful if others agree to see some sort of graph with all levies.
Coming tonight. All right, anything else on this particular slide or conversation? Okay, we can always come back as needed. The next one I want to bring up is exactly in answer to your question there. Let me just see about getting that one up here now, and that is going to be this one here. So, this particular slide is reflective of all of our debt, lease levy and existing debt, okay? And I'm just going to see if I can maybe, keep messing this up, my apologies. Okay. I think the point on this particular slide that we would like to point out is these are based upon the taxes payable year at the bottom. So what that means to us is our community is going to be taxed in that calendar year that you see listed below on this graph. We will receive the funds available then for the following fiscal years. So payable 2026 is going to be for the school year 26-27, okay? So when you see this drop in payable 28 compared to payable 27, that tells you that from the school year 27-28 to 28-29 is when we will experience that drop in our debt, okay? This is not and has not been talked about in our conversations and is not reflected in our conversations around the general fund projections or forecasts you've seen from me. Because that's not general fund, that's debt service, okay? So this is inclusive of your Fund 7, your debt in total there. But what this means is it is included on the levy documents. It is included in your homeowners and businesses and their tax statements, okay? So if there is that significant of a drop, it equates to about $17 per month. And that drop would be experienced by our taxpayers just because we have debt rolling off that we no longer need to levy them for, okay? For principal and interest. Given this information and comparing it or combining it, I guess I should say, with the other information we've been talking about around levy in general, which would come also out of the levy, right, out of that process, is what we want to really kind of pursue and have more dialogue around tonight. So the next slide I want to bring up is a table that actually is right here. And this table, if you go back to our conversation on January 12th, we talked about the fact that if I could recall, help you recall, there was a slide that showed here's $364 in a column, and the cost for an average home of $525,000 or so was $180 annually, or approximately $15 per month, right? The next column over showed like I just want to get the right number. I believe it was 762. And so that showed you $180 for the $364, and that 364 was like, how much more would we be asking for on our referendum than what we currently have, okay? And the 762 was, how much more would we be asking for in addition to what we currently had? This table is intended to kind of take a step back for a moment and show then, if we do a revoke and replace, what savings would there be to that same homeowner in the first column of numbers of revoked authority? And then what would be the proposed authority? And this is utilizing the concept of a $987.97, which is the $364 more. And what does that look like for a net change? So I want, if we could, just focus on that for just a moment. And I'm going to scroll so you can see the average. So for a $525,000 home, by revoking what we currently have in place, there'd be a $309 savings to that homeowner on an annual basis, with an ask of $489 on an annual basis, net difference $180 or $15 per month, okay? So that is kind of what I was trying to, when looking at the previous slide that we had provided to you on January 12th, it really didn't show you like what's the current picture, right? So this is just to kind of reaffirm, this is kind of what that would look like with a revoke and replace. Now, you could replace that $987.97 with instead the figure that is $762 more instead of the $364 more. And what's the difference then would be that $377, right? Or almost $32 per month increase, okay? But you'd still see the 309 reduction, and that net change column would then, instead of the 180, you'd see the 377. So as we get further into conversations and there's more discussion about what you'd like to see in those figures, I just want to give you an example of a table that could help us understand that better, right? Now, I do want to take a moment, and we're going to come back to this one, but we're going to now go to the slide that is talking about, it kind of looks like what we were just on, only this time it's looking at what happens if, remember that drop we talked about just a moment ago? What if in pay 28, we saw some type of increase then that would be consistently equivalent to, like, say, $3.8 million in capital project levy, and or almost the equivalent of that 762, okay? So my point being that you could take that, what would otherwise be a drop in tax levy for taxpayers, and instead keep it level and have the room for approximately a $3.8 million capital project levy or equivalent referendum operating levy, okay? So this is just to show that running that for 10 years, what would that then look like, okay? So given that, now you'd have the potential capital project levy or operating referendum levy. You'd have your lease levy and your existing debt. Let's go back to the slide we were just on and talk about this for a moment. Let's say we were talking about that kind of scenario, and we asked voters for a revoke and replace of $15 more per month, $180 annually. We would find ourselves receiving, instead of the $5.7 million we currently see, we could see $9 million or 3.3 more a year, $3.3 million more a year. And with a 1-year delay, you could have a capital projects levy of $3.8 million additional with no increase to taxpayers because the debt would be falling off and it would just continue forward, if that makes sense. So it's a lot to think about. It's a lot to put out there. The last thing I'd like to kind of share on this is what type of ballot language would this kind of look like, potentially. And so we do have a couple of examples around that. Let's see, this one here. And so when you're doing, one thing I do know we want to make sure we're doing is taking something to voters in November of 2026. Recall that there was a slide that showed that the board has authority to continue our existing referendum for another 10 years, no inflation, exactly the same amount we've been receiving, and do that by board action alone. That window of opportunity for the board began for you on July 1st of 2025, and that deadline for when that action would have to take place would be June 15th of 2027. So there's an opportunity between now and then for voters to weigh in on a question that could be brought before them, or two, right? Whatever we do, we want to make sure that we work with our legal counsel to ensure that the ballot language itself retains the right for the board to continue to have that authority to renew existing as is in the event something would not be voted positively by our taxpayers, okay? So know that that's kind of what we'd want to really make sure we're doing well. My understanding is that a revoke and replace will still allow that process to happen. Should you take a question out to voters that just renews, that would eliminate that possibility for you. So we want to make sure we're wording that properly. So under this ballot format, option 1, it talks about a revoke and replace, revoking the $623.97 per pupil, replacing that authorization with a new authorization amount. This is an example of the $987.97. Should it be instead that $762 number, you'd have a higher figure there. Subject to an annual increase at the rate of inflation. Recall in our conversation in January 12th that for just $24 more in the 10th year, we could have potentially seen $12.6 million more throughout that 10-year period. Of course, now at the beginning, you never know what that's going to look like because you don't know CPI over the years. And that was estimating the last 2 years, right? But there were 7 years that we knew for sure what the CPI has been, right? So that isn't something we set. It's not something you control as a board. It is something that is determined on an annual basis by the state of Minnesota, okay? So the proposed new referendum revenue authorization will be first levied, and you're going to state the payable year with an applicable 10 years, which is typical. And then by voting yes, you are voting for a property tax increase. That's always going to be there. This would facilitate that first column of revoking, and then the second column of putting in what it is you're asking to be replaced with that net difference. If you were to ask a second question, for example, of that $3.8 million, here's an example of ballot language where instead of it being payable 2027, you would delay it payable 2028 in the language, and that would then allow for that drop in your debt to be offset then with this and zero impact to taxpayers in any of those years. They would see an increase initially, of course, for the $15 per month or $180 per year based on that first question's language. Of course, then when you're doing a capital projects levy authorization, this is where the rate has to be calculated at the time of the ballot being approved. And so you're really basically stating what does that equate to in dollars that you're asking for. That will change over the years simply based upon your community's valuations. So if your market valuation were to decline, that amount would decline because the rate is set. But if your valuation of your property in your district would increase, then that amount would increase because the rate is set, okay? You would typically also list exactly what that authorization is providing funds for, and how you word that is what you need to then live by for those 10 years. The second thing on the backside of this page is a different option, which I had never thought about, and didn't even know that there have been a few districts who have gone this direction, but it is a situation where you could also just, we're not talking now about a capital projects levy, but instead you're talking about a stepped approach. And what that would mean is, for example, revoking the 623.97, replacing it with authorization as listed below. Well, that looks like $987.97 per pupil for taxes payable in 2027, which is the $15 per month or $180. And then instead, the $1385.97 per pupil for taxes payable in 2028, subject to an annual increase at the rate of inflation starting with those taxes payable. So in this case, that first year would be no inflation, which first year there isn't, right? But the second year, the amount would be stepped up to offset that reduction in your debt. And then the inflation is applied from there forward. In this example, you have one question. It is a little bit more confusing for people to understand, but the concept is that it's just a stepped approach. So the first year is one number, the second year and every year beyond is the second set of numbers. And that is for a 10 years in this language. So those are just ballot language examples. When talking with our financial advisors about what options they could present for us, these were the 4 things they wanted us to make sure we shared with you. Happy to answer any questions around this that you might have. It's a lot of information to digest. No matter what we do, obviously the communication around this is going to be important. In my experience, anytime you bring ballot language forward, there are so many restrictions on what it is that it has to say. And we'll always need to say that this is an increase in taxes. And therefore, it's like, how do you help people understand? Well, not necessarily, because you're going to see a drop in your debt that you're not going to be levied for. So that's the other communication that has to happen in order to help people understand the big picture, the full picture. And I think that's also where sometimes when talking in the past around inflationary clause, it's been very, very common for districts to kind of steer away from that. But I think given what's occurred in our economy over the past 10 years, for example, and what we can anticipate possibly moving forward, the reality is that the amount that it would generate for a school district versus the amount that an individual homeowner or business owner might pay towards it, it's something that's worth having further dialogue around, in my opinion, to really show that investment that actually would be available for our students, and at the same time not necessarily cost as much more on an annual basis. So I will pause, see what you have for questions.
Do you have any insight into when the previous levy did pass, why they did not go for an inflation factor? Do you have any knowledge into that?
What I have understood is that it was in response to having a failed question prior, and that it was thought to be, we need to make sure that this passes. And It's true. I mean, inflationary language makes people second guess, and especially if you're talking about someone at the polls who has not heard much about this. They don't know what that really means. And honestly, you can't stand before people and say, what is this actually going to mean for you in the third or fourth year? Because you don't know, right? And so that is something that seems very scary, and oftentimes the decision is just made to, we're not going to include it. Taxpayers will feel more comfortable about that. But when you start seeing, looking back, the loss of opportunity, then you have to stop and question. Maybe it's worth that extra dialogue.
Understanding what you've presented as far as the questions here, can you put something in the question to say, without the inflation, this would be a change of $15 per month?
Ballot language is very restrictive, and that type of language wouldn't work necessarily because my home may not require that, right? And my home
yeah.
might require a lot
Right.
more than that, so.
Thank you.
So how many of, and I've got a couple part question, just so you know.
Okay.
Of the graph, we're now second to last in the metro area of funding. How many of those other districts currently have inflationary factors? And the reason why I ask is when the board did decide not to include the inflationary factor, we were definitely in the minority then. I assume now we're really in the minority because from what I understand from the ballot language, that nearly all of them did include inflationary factors.
Yeah, I will have to get that information. I believe that there's a means for us to do so. I just need to, I don't have it off the top of my head.
Okay. The other thing is that regardless of the numbers that were put in here, last time we did include what I would consider to be more of an amortization table to show when the debt dropped off, and that even at the average of 500 to 525, people would then experience lesser dollars. But that did not seem to resonate even with the grid that we put online with plug in your home value or your address, and we'll show you an estimate of what it would be, even though they showed that at $45, they would have dropped even lower than that. And the majority of homes were never going to pay the amount anyways. So how can we, and obviously with the $15 extra and stuff like that, we're still treading water. We're not going to be able to put in all the safety and security measures and other things that were on the last ballot that people had asked for. I'm just wondering can we show the amortization table on that rate to say, okay, here's what you'll pay year over year without the inflation, because you can't say that, in order to communicate to them and actually show the board what that'll look like? Because like I said, we did that last time.
Yeah.
And you're right, I'm not sure people understood it. But it did drop significantly when our last series of debt rolled off. It didn't really seem to faze anybody. Well, it fazed a lot of people, but I mean, I'm not quite sure the message got out.
And I think that is our challenge, right? It is going to be about communication, and it is about trying to share, and sometimes maybe looking back at something is a little bit more helpful for people to see. If you look back at the last 10 years, the amount that taxpayers actually paid for the same average valued home that was at $1,333,000 and now is projected to be at $535,000 went from $371 and right now you're only paying $289 on an annual basis. So it's like, this is something we can't tell you for sure. I'm not going to tell you it's going to be this because I could be wrong. Your valuation of your home is going to do what it's going to do based upon factors that I don't have any control over. The best we can do is be as transparent and as honest with our answers and responses, and as open to what questions do you have? How can we help you better understand this? And as frequent meetings as possible to gather as much information, or get as much information out to people. I mean, those are the tactics I've seen work really well. I think I've been involved in probably, I want to say 5 different elections, and always at those meetings, and I'll be honest, many of those meetings, there weren't very many people, right? And so it comes down to the support in your community to invest in schools and to feel comfortable with that process, and that's a challenge for us in every community to make sure that we're getting that message out. We're at a point where we are not alone. Every school district in the state is managing the issue that their revenue's not keeping up with their expenditures. I guarantee you. I don't know of a district that hasn't had to look at those expenditures and do something about it on an annual basis. However, it isn't just an expense problem. This is a revenue issue as well. And we're gonna have to approach this from many different avenues. Advocating at the state level for a general education formula that actually keeps up with the average cost of our expenditures. And it's not necessarily appropriate to expect that staff members who are working every day in the schools are going to see a standard of living increase that they can live on. And so it's like, how do you make this all happen? I don't have the answers entirely, but this is one avenue that we have to explore, and we have to communicate and be as open as possible with our taxpayers and hope for the best.
Well, my next question is obviously by putting these numbers in here, we're not going to be improving anything. We're going to be pretty much treading water. So all the improvements we wanted to do, as well as save the cuts that we've had to make, I'd like to at least have that discussion, because the first thing people, when they go to the polls, are going to ask is, what am I getting for this? And what they're going to be getting for this is just to keep the schools open at this point, to stay solvent. And we've got a lot of needs and those new expenses. And also, by the way, of that list, I think there's only one other school district in the metro that has the leanest and cheapest schedule. So on top of the money, we actually have cuts in other areas that they haven't even tried to experience yet, or even want to go there. So, and that hurts our kids, it hurts their opportunities, it hurts, obviously, our teachers too, and our test scores, and God knows what else. So, I mean, we have to be really, really clear that we're basically we're still gonna be almost breathing out of a straw. So I just don't know how to manage that conversation with people when you say your taxes are going to increase, but oh, by the way, we're not giving you anything extra at all from the educational experience and the attractiveness of moving into this district or open enrollment, et cetera. So that's the thing that concerns me about all this language is, like,
I heard what your comments are. I tend to agree with much of what you've said in the regard that $364 increase per pupil unit, or $762 increase per pupil unit. We have in the 5-year projection, Appendix 1, tables A, B, and C that show continuation of what we have as is. We have B with the $364 increase, and $762 being C. And it is true, when you look at those, that no matter how I did the numbers, we were still having a need to make cuts every year based on the projections, right? And now there are assumptions made in these projections that the whole point of projections is to try and give you kind of a long-range game plan. And that game plan, with all these options, you're right, doesn't get us anything more. Can you change out something that you might have in place right now for something different that might be a different approach? Sure. But if you're going to add, then we're talking about more.
Director Ryder, I think that, Director France brings up a really good point, that part of our strat plan is to optimize resources. So we still have work to do as a district to optimize resources so that when we do get to the ballot question, and after we listen to our community, we know that we live in a very tax-adverse community, and based on past levies, and I think, we do need to optimize our resources to make sure exactly what you said, to make sure that our money is being spent appropriately in our district.
I do have a few questions on these 3 slides too, but,
Okay.
so what I was asking is this particular slide, is it, maybe I missed it. Did we update this with the bond levy including, just to see like our district, what are we paying in total compared to others with the bond as well?
No, I do not have everyone else's debt schedules in, and I don't, that would take some work.
Okay.
If there were a few that we wanted to compare against, I could work to get that. But I don't have that.
Okay, I was just curious,
Yep.
like the total tax burden compared to others.
Well, and keep in mind that the tax burden is a whole nother, like there's, what is the debt? And then there's, what does that actually cost your taxpayers? And so keep in mind that our makeup is different from a neighboring district, for example. And so it does come down to the property tax rates and how that gets applied to commercial versus homeowners versus apartment and residential. So it's like, it is a very complex conversation, and one that we know we are mostly residential. And as a result, then, that is going to mean that the burden falls upon our residents who are homeowners.
Yeah, okay, so I was just
Yeah,
curious.
that comparison, the comparisons from neighboring districts, there just really isn't a district that compares to, I mean, we really, our business tax base just isn't there. So I mean,
I was more just curious, generally speaking, like, do most of these districts have bond levies also, or no? Are we unique in that?
I would anticipate yes, simply because in order to maintain buildings, it does typically require something new, and particularly like security advancements, right, too? So those things aren't covered under LTFM, and so typically it does require some type of bonded debt to cover those expenditures.
Great. Okay, sorry, my second question was, the 623.97 that we have today, if we were to take that and just adjust for inflation only with nothing added, what is that amount? Like 8 something?
Well, so this is the thing, you would not know that because your tax impact in the new year wouldn't be any different than what it is currently. But the second year out, then CPI would be applied, and then that would be, increased. However, keep in mind that every year, provided your community's valuation is growing, the burden is spread a little bit more, right? Now, that might mean more for me if my valuation increased significantly than compared to some neighbor that it didn't, right? So that's hard to say, but this is what gets really confusing because you can't explain that well at the time of the polls or prior to in those conversations, because you can't speak to what that inflationary cost is going to be at this time. And it's not that we don't want to, or that, we're trying to hide something. The fact of the matter is, it's just, you won't know that until the CPI is understood. You can make estimates, certainly.
I was just looking for an estimate, because the 987.97, the first proposed number that you gave us is a little bit on top of that. I think we
Yeah,
said
and,
15-ish on it.
and if you look back at one of the slides we had in the previous meeting on the 12th, there was a calculation for, and I think I went through that, and it looked to be like a 2.3%, was the recent average or projected number for CPI. And so it's kind of like you could use something like that and come up with your numbers in that manner.
Okay, yeah, okay, I was just looking for a ballpark.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, my personal opinion on the ballot formats is I like the first one, because it separates the two. And if, you know, one may pass and one may not, right? Versus lumping them together, which I think maybe for us might be a little bit more dangerous. I don't know, that's my personal perspective. But I don't know that I'm in favor of a capital levy and certainly not a tech levy, but I realize that's just sample language. Okay, I think we'll have more when we get to the forecast, I guess. Go into that. Yeah.
So just some comments and then a question. And thank you for putting all of this together. And I think there were some things that I didn't understand from last time that I think I do now, especially when it comes to like revoking. There is a deduction and then there's adding that back into it. So I think that's a really important thing to note there. And, you know, I would challenge the notion that we live in a very tax adverse community, because I don't know if I'd be sitting in this seat if that was truly the case. But we've heard from teachers at the last public forum about class sizes. I was at Red Tail Ridge today and they were talking about interventionists and the significant need that we have there because we have significantly less than other districts do. Director France, you just talked about cuts that we've made, and I know that we, a couple of years ago, made cuts from a 7-period schedule to a 6-period schedule. There are things that we have done over the years to try and tread that water. And I guess my question is, one of the things, Dr. Anderson, that you've told me is, what are we going to do? What are the conditions that or what are we setting for the conditions if we want to be successful, right? And I think it's not so much that we're tax adverse, it's just that we're just not realistic about what those conditions are. And what I'd really like to know, and this is my question, is I'm not interested in talking about what do we think we can pass because the last levy failed. I really just want to know, for those things, class sizes, interventionists, returning to things that we have cut in the past, what is that number going to take? And that's the conversation that I want to have, because that is a lot more realistic to me in figuring out in my brain, what do we need? And like to your point, Director France, I don't think it's just to tread water or to be solvent. Like I do want to have a conversation about what do we need to actually move some of the stuff forward that we want to.
So, just a quick clarification question to what you just said. So what I'm hearing you ask is, what would that annual increase of revenue be to the district to reinstate things such as a 7-period day, to get a robust MTSS, interventionists, address nuances of some of the class size conversations that we're hearing about, and build up the fund balance to a level that's going to be 8% or higher? Okay, I just want to make sure I'm hearing what you're asking. And I mean, I think that's a valid question to just, again, have a data point. And that's something that, as we prepare for our February 5th Finance Town Hall, did I get that date right, Christy?
You did.
All right, February 5th. This is part of the dialogue that we actually want to have with community. There'll be some of these slides that we'll share on the front side, but engaging similar to what we did at our strategic planning sessions, having these ideation tables with folks to kind of explore where the priorities lie. So I think the big thing for me is, I don't think anyone in this district questions the value of having academic excellence for all of our kids. I don't think anybody questions that. And I think your point rings true in terms of, and then what would that cost? to match the expectations around excellence. And that's going to be a large number. I'll just be honest. That's going to be a scary number for folks. But I think it's important to at least have that out there so people understand we're not talking about like a dream. Like, this is what we believe it would take to get everything fully vetted. Dr. Anderson has vetted out kind of a rough estimate of FTE for a robust MTSS model, okay, of what, and then take that times the average teaching costs. Our local historian, Martha, has just shared with me the other day a document from 2007, when we changed this, 2010. And I believe it was in the neighborhood of $1.5 to $1.6 million at that time that we saved to reduce a period from the high school in the middle school. Now, roll that up to where we're at now with inflation and what that would truly cost us to reinstate that. It's going to be a lot more than 1.5 or 1.6. We're probably talking somewhere in the 2 to 3 mil range. So I think those are the things that we can definitely flesh out in these community-based conversations, just so folks can temper what does that mean when we say that word? Because that word comes with a cost, and what does it take to build towards that? So if it's not all at once, okay, we understand that. Then how do we start chunking and building towards that? But Director Franz brought up a point earlier that to basically unlock the doors and turn on the lights, and we said this at our last campaign, to say we're gonna increase your taxes and have nothing in return other than kind of keep things status quo, that's a hard sell. And I publicly stated that in all the sessions that I was in. That was a really tough message to have to say. So I think we can build out some of that aspirations of academic excellence just to be some data points in this total mix too for the board and for our community.
Yeah, and sorry, I just wanted to finish the thought. Yeah, and I think that's important just because we might not get everything, but I mean, it gives us the ability to kind of look at that in totality and say, here's what it would take. Okay, well, we can't really swing this, so if we just take that out and then, like, I do think it just, again, talking about these as like, what might inflation be a couple years from now, or like, what are these numbers, what are these forecasts? I think just talking about real, actual numbers and costs of what it would take to do some of these things is just a more valuable conversation.
Is it okay? Okay. So one of the things that we also have to remember when we're going out and asking for money, and I'm not quite sure if we made this clear, that when people want to compare us to other districts, they have this system, they have this, they have these classes, you know, they offer this, they have smaller class sizes, for instance, or they offer, you know, more curricular tech, they have the, you know, a lot of those, there's a couple of them on here that have never, ever failed a referendum. And so they've had a cushion that's built up over time to establish this. And so, you know, their communities know and value what it would be like if they didn't continue that and then they actually revoked it. Because then, as we heard, when we actually had to follow through with what we knew we were going to have to cut, we still haven't cut absolutely everything we could, that our community started to raise noise because they didn't want to cut those things, but we didn't have a choice. And so, you know, those other schools that not only have the 7-period day and smaller class sizes and see the results coming out in academic excellence, that we want to be like, people have to realize that you've got to start building this foundation. So having a long-term plan of doing that and establishing and proving we can do this and then going back and asking for more would be great. But, you know, even, you know, we still hear about it all the time. We hear about simple little things, not just class sizes and pools and things like that, but we also hear about the fact that, you know, we have families emailing us about certain things in the schools. You know, why can't you fix this? Why can't you add security on those lower doors? Well, they were in the last referendum. And even though we had those community meetings that said, this is, and people said, this is what we want to see. If we're going to spend this money, this is what we want to see. They still didn't vote for it. So somehow or another, we've got to get this long-term plan and message out and talk about the benefits and how we're going to measure those benefits like we did last time in a more constructive manner and a more proactive manner. Because you're always going to have community members that simply don't want to pay a dime. They're like, you know what, if I have to focus on schools and students or save a couple bucks, I'd rather save a couple bucks. So they're clearly telling us what their priority is. But afterwards, as we heard from the community, they came back and they got mad that we actually had to cut things. So we have to do something different to actually improve communication on that. And I don't know what it is, but I like what's been said here today, and we just need to figure that out. It's funny because at the MSBA conference, there were school districts in there that says, you just got to ask your community, do you want to fund kids or do you want to save a couple bucks? You know, those are your priorities, and if you tell us those are your priorities and you don't want to have good schools, then you don't want to have good schools. That's it. We can't do anything about that.
I think, Director France, you bring up a really good point, and I think we're moving in the right path forward. This community engagement meeting that we're having on February 5th, I'm incredibly thrilled that we're having this. When I've talked to districts who have passed levies, they listen to their community. This is not something that we did on the last levy.
We did.
We did not.
We
I
did.
was on this board, and I'm not going to argue with you. We never had a community engagement session where we asked our community directly what they wanted on the levy.
We did so in a survey as well as in multiple community engagement sessions.
Okay, then I didn't have access to those survey results. So I'm just saying, as a board member who's been here for 3 years, I'm thrilled that we're having this, because at the end of the day, our community votes. And they vote with their dollars. And so when we start to listen to our community and listen to what their priorities are, they will pass levies. I mean, we currently have 1,800 students in our district who don't go to our district because we're not listening to them. And so I'm not trying to be critical, but I am just thrilled that we're looking at this levy different than we have done in the past. I'm hopeful. Dr. Thomas, are we going to have more than just one? Okay, I'm hopeful because I know, like, for instance, Farmington, they did 3 sessions. And so it allows people with scheduling conflicts and all that kind of stuff to be able to attend. Yeah, and I was also thrilled when you said you're doing this similar to the STRAT plan, because it's going to be able to allow different voices to come together and really let us know as a board what's important to our community. So I'm grateful to hear that. So thank you, Dr. Thomas, for your leadership on that.
If I could suggest, it's possible we could pull up and compare the results of our community engagement meetings and the survey, which was in our board packets from last time, and see if these new community engagement meetings for this year actually differ from the wants and needs of the community. I know that they were in the board packet for a year prior to starting a year prior. And so when we asked, let's see if that community message has actually changed. And I don't know if we can afford to do a formal survey this time. But if we could, it would be nice to compare those, because if we're hearing the same thing, then maybe it's just the lexicon that we used.
Are you referring to the Morris Letterman survey, Director France? Is that what you're referring to when you say survey? Because we did do the survey and we didn't listen to our community in that survey. So I'm just curious which survey you're referring to.
I think it was it Morris Leatherman, or was it somebody? Yeah, we had Morris Leatherman. That was one aspect that we did. And we've done that before each referendum prior to this. We've always done some sort of survey. I just don't know. Morris Leatherman isn't cheap, and I don't know if that's.
I wouldn't recommend doing it.
Yeah, we can't do that. Okay.
Yeah,
I
so.
think, on that same note, and you bring up a great point, Director Smith, on like the interventionists, right? But, I think like where that feedback might be different is that, you might value an interventionist, or we might think we need that as a district, but like maybe as a parent and the community doesn't understand the role and the impact of that role, where I would say, I don't want an interventionist, I want an advanced math class, right? So, it's like that, like finding the needs, right, and getting that feedback from the community is so, so important, because if we, say we're gonna, add certain things, but it's not in the right places, right? We've missed the mark, and that's, so key. So, and just little things like that, right? So, I mean, probably most parents don't even understand what an interventionist does. So, you know, what is it that parents in our community want? So,
And I think
it's a
too-
good point, it should drive the amount that we're asking for.
Right, and, you know, I think everyone brings up valid points. You know, the goal of the district is to serve the whole district. And one of the things that I've noticed as, you know, serving on the board for 3 years is like the input that is received by community, whether it be through my relationships or through engagement sessions that we have. It's being able to receive the information and then, you know, do what we can in the best way that we can that serves the whole. Giving too much weight to, you know, there's always two extreme sides, and then there's everything in between. And so it's learning how to balance that and giving commitment to the community that we are going to listen to you, we're going to receive feedback and give as much communication to our situation. I feel like we've been communicating the same type of message, at least since I've been on the board. You know, the projections have come to fruition, and so it's going to take us as a board, it's going to take the district staff and teachers and all of the families to come together in this, and it will be how the community votes. Is there any other dialogue or questions for Director Ryder?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily for Dr. Ryder, and I appreciate all of this. I think the only thing I really want to encourage people is to come to these meetings. Please come to these meetings. First of all, they're a lot of work for staff to put together to, you know, have a presentation ready and have FAQs ready and things like that. And I really don't mean this lightly. Like, these are your hard-earned tax dollars. And I don't think a single person in this room disputes that in any way. Yes, you should know what you're gonna get or not get. We want your feedback. We want to hear from you. And you know, sometimes I feel like I'm just going to say the quiet part out loud. Sometimes I feel like we hear from the same 15 people. And I love those 15 people. I want to hear from those 15 people, but 15 people does not a district make. Sorry. And I really encourage people to come to these meetings, or if you can't come to the meeting, because God knows we understand, maybe that night doesn't work for you that night or that week. Tell us, write us, have conversations, talk at the basketball game, you know, whatever it takes, because I really feel like the more conversations we have and the more feedback we get, it just helps us. So it's a plea, to be honest with you, for I think all of us sitting up at this table, and for administration to I encourage everybody to really get involved.
Can I second that motion?
Yeah.
If I just make one more, and just to echo off that point, Director Olstad, I think, and to the point, Director Mason, that you made, if people don't know what interventionists do, then please come to these meetings, because if we're talking about interventionists, if we're talking about what is going to be the most beneficial to a child, statistically speaking, if you have interventionists from K through 3, to make sure that they are on track and you can get those kids while they're there, they are going to be far more successful as they go throughout their education than if you wait. So when we're talking about interventionists or advanced math, I'm going to pick an interventionist every single time. So.
And I think that's a really fair point that you made too, Director Mason. It's just like, you know, well, I don't know what an interventionist is because my kid doesn't, you know, use one or see one. Completely fair, right? Like, completely fair. Well, I don't necessarily care about advanced math because my kid's not in advanced math and he or she isn't on that track, which is fine. But everybody, every family has something different, right? Every family has different priorities that are just as important as the next family's. And not to say we want to be all things for all, right? But that's really hard and that costs money. And so I think that's a really fair point is, you know, almost like plain language, like, okay, interventionist, what the heck does that mean? You know, and this person does this, and this is why it's important. And I think that would be really beneficial because I really see your point there, and yours as well. This is why they're important, and yeah.
Can I make
all the
one,
things.
one adjustment to that? I don't think this meeting is the way people learn about intervention. I would really encourage them to actually call the district and get it from a teacher, simply because, here's the thing, when the educators are in the classroom, and you do have kids in the same class, some with advanced and some that need help, with that interventionist, the thing that I think that the administration, and I'm not gonna speak for Dr. Anderson, can do is actually allow the educator to also help the kids that need advanced math by having the interventionist help with the kids that need the extra help. So, I mean, there's a circuitous effect here, and hearing from the educators and hearing from somebody like Dr. Anderson explain how all this all works together, how a benefit to one benefits all, that sort of thing, because that's the way the education system works and the MTSS and all that kind of stuff. We're not experts, we're not subject matter experts, and some of the questions we ask here are not gonna bring out that subject matter expertise either, because that's not where we're coming from. So I would encourage people to actually go to the administration and ask those questions.
And you, I'll just say ditto, and the only thing because that's what I was trying to hit my button for. So it's us here, and all, our families have relationships with their schools. And I think you'll be able to get a better context of what does that mean for your school? Because that might look different. That same role might be received differently based upon how it might be utilized, given the needs of each individual school. So yes, talk with us at the District Services Center and reach out to your building administrator. They could help you better understand whatever their role might be, you know? And I think Director Olstad, you bring up a very fair point that every family approaches these titles differently based upon what their unique student need is or what they perceive that title to mean, et cetera. So the source is at the school and with us, and we'll be more than happy to contextualize that as best we can. Thank you.
All right, anything else on that? We'll move on to the superintendent evaluation
Oh,
mid-year
we're missing
check-in.
one. We need to go through the five-year forecast.
Oh, sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't even look up.
I know it's been a
I'm
long
looking
evening,
out.
so you tell me how much time you would like to discuss the five-year forecast. This is one that we can hit like the high points and have further conversations in our next meeting if you choose. Happy to do however you want to do this. Format of this is very similar to the October memo. However, significant adjustments have been made since then, and I want to make sure you're knowing what those are. So maybe I run through those highlights
Sounds good.
as a starting point?
Yep, sounds
Okay.
good.
All right, so this is a memo dated January 26th for today. With regard to our five-year financial projections, you'll note, I have shifted things a little bit in that we are now trying to focus on Table A, which is assuming the current voter-approved operating levy is renewed by school board according to statute, meaning no additional inflation and such. Appendix 1, Table B is going to assume a new voter-approved revoke and replace operating levy approved November 2026 for $988 per adjusted pupil unit with inflationary factor. And Table C, assuming a new voter-approved revoke and replace operating levy is approved November 26 for $13.86 per APU with inflationary factor. When you just roll forward numbers, I consider that a forecast. When you begin now to start applying different scenarios, then we're really kind of talking more now about projections. Like, how does that change that projection, and what does that now look like? So these, of course, are not, there's no and in between these. This is like one or the other type thing, right? In this process, since October, a couple things have happened. You have approved a revised 2026 fiscal year budget. That is the basis for this. I know when we talked in October, I had made some assumptions in that process, but now those final numbers that were approved for the revised 26 budget are what you're gonna see in the 26 column. The numbers didn't change from when you approved the 26 revised budget for that year. But what I have tried to do is address some question of enrollment, right? And so when we revised the budget for the current year, the enrollment was something we looked at. And that was taken into consideration in that process. That enrollment projection forward has shifted since October. So one thing that I noted when we went back to work on numbers after you had asked that we bring forward a revised budget that was balanced and at 8%, you start with revenue. And where's revenue generated but by enrollment? So you review that, you review your projections. And our model used in October was showing a significant decline in year one compared to what we've seen in the past. And I'm like, something's not feeling right about that. So I inquired of the Ellers, who the model came from, and he's like, well, you can't just roll that forward. You need to get the newest model. So we did that. And then in addition, I learned that MDE on November 30th put out a new revenue projection model. So one thing is the enrollment shifted a little bit in the fact that the new model now takes into consideration more accurate numbers. You won't see as significant of a decline in year one as what we were showing before, which is why the numbers increased slightly. And then when you apply the revenue projection model, you're going to find that the new model from the state is now referring to what is currently being paid out on the IDEA system based on current year information, not based upon what happened last year and what are they anticipating might it look like this year, right? So the models that I'm working with kind of refer back to like, when is it updated? And November 30th is when they updated and shifted from last year's numbers for categorical aids to what is it currently looking like right now off your IDEA system, okay? So what did that mean for us? Well, enrollment slightly increased, and then in addition, our state categorical aids increased, okay? Those are the two main reasons, that our revenues increased compared to what you saw in October, okay? Additionally, just to note that on the enrollment projections, previously we were using a 3-year weighted average, weighted ratio. We are now using a 4-year weighted ratio. And my reason for doing that was because of the impact of our PSEO that has seemingly increased each year. And that means then our end of year ADM numbers may not be quite as high as they have been in the past. And by doing the 4-year weighted ratio, that took that kind of into consideration for future years. It may be too conservative, we might find, but at this point, it was slight and it was just something, right? So there's that. And then page 2 of the memo, you'll find table 1 that shows the ADMs. The changes aren't really that significant compared to what you saw previously in October, but you will find that there is a more significant decline in the 4th and 5th year. Still using the 2% assumption on the Gen Ed formula for each future year. Did not change any significant assumptions with regard to EL or American Indian Aid. That all stayed the same. Referendum, as we talked about, we have table A, B, and C, each with different scenarios. Current being extended. Table B being that which is $988 per adjusted pupil unit and $1,386 being used in table C. Cross-subsidy attributable to special education, as you know, our revised budget for the current year increased our special education aid. A large part of that is the cross-subsidy. For the current year, that number was kept at that figure moving forward. That may be a conservative estimate if funding were to continue as it has been, and anticipating that our cost for special education would increase. But it also might be too high of a number if the $250 million, for example, that the state's looking for and maybe doesn't find, and so in order to get it, they then, reduce the amount of special ed aid that we otherwise were anticipating in the future. None of that's known at this point in time. Task force is still working on that. So that's a question that's up in the air. I would say that's the most volatile number on the revenue side, is that special education estimate moving forward, so keep that in mind. Let's see. Federal funds basically went back to make sure that moving ahead for 27 and beyond, we were using essentially what did we receive this year as an allocation, not the carryover from the previous years. So trying to just use that base allocation and use that moving ahead. Moving on to page 3. For expenses, did not change the assumptions that we've talked about before, where we're assuming a 2.5% increase in wage scales during the collective bargaining cycles and moving from 26 through 31. However, keep in mind that there are some contractual obligations that include steps or longevity or things of that nature that change that percentage for some groups. And so that is possibly a shift from past projections you've seen in past years, in the fact that I am using what I anticipate we're gonna have to spend based on those contracts. Let's see. The most significant adjustment that has been made actually last Tuesday, had this all done ready for you, and then had a meeting on health insurance. And unfortunately, that picture is just trending a whole lot faster than people want to hear and think about. So remember, we had, I believe it was 6% in. That assumption is nowhere going to be covering what we anticipate we will see for next year, nor what we would see beyond that. So the fact of the matter is, trend in medical is moving from, it's moving from 10 to 16% with regard to just trend alone. And so the question you have to ask yourself is, are you utilizing the plan more and your claims are higher because of more utilization, or is the cost for each claim that much higher? And it's usually yes and yes, right? Correct me if I'm saying anything So unfortunately, that changed our assumptions, and I considered, how much do we have to make this adjustment? But when I sat down with HR and determined what is it that our actual premium in total is that we're billed in total, right? And then applied that increased percentage and came up with what is our anticipated cost from a district perspective, given our contract languages, and realized that we were talking about a $1 to $1.3 million annually. It had to be made. I had to put that in there because I was looking at a $3 million reduction for this next year, and now we're not. We're looking at something different. So that was significant and needed to be in there. The numbers that you see in the second paragraph on page 3 did shift.
Can I ask I'm
Yep.
sorry.
No,
I didn't
please,
mean-
go ahead.
yeah.
That's fine.
Can I ask a clarifying question on that? I just want to make sure.
Yes.
So, on the healthcare part, you had originally budgeted 6%, correct?
Yes.
And, yeah, that's what I was gonna make sure. Historical 6, now it's 16, right?
It's 16 by my numbers because we don't cover, for some, we don't cover that increase fully, but we cover most of that increase, yes.
And that's gonna cost The 1.2 to 1.3 million
Annually.
annually. Got it. Okay. I just
Yep.
wanted to make sure that.
Yep.
it was- Okay. And that's why we're seeing,
That's why you're seeing the shift in my figures. Yep. Significantly on the expense side. Okay?
all right, I appreciate it. Thank you.
Yes. In the second paragraph on page 3, then, we had some assumptions for what those costs were for utilities, transportation, maintenance, and capital. Those numbers from October were just updated based upon the revised fiscal year '26 budgets. And that is now about 12% of our district expenses. Let's see, what is next? Projection, enrollment, slight decline, continuing. Although, you know, like I say, that first year wasn't as big of a hit, so we actually saw an increase for '27. All right, so we are committed to fair labor contracts and appropriate school resource levels, and as such, we spend approximately 83% of our total expense in salaries and benefits. So that is true for a lot of schools. I will then move on down to this graph, which you've seen before. You know, this is something we need to have conversations around because since 2021, this graph has significantly taken a different, you know, trajectory and needs to be considered at the state level. We're not alone. I would say, what else to point out here? Just more discussion about some of the details for people who may not know much about school finance. Happy to have answers for questions people may have. Certainly just let me know. In conclusion, the fact is that we want to stay out of statutory operating debt. And in order to do that, there are certain things that are going to need to take place. Any 5-year plan that I try to put together shows us having to reduce at this point in time. And so that's a fact. I'm going to skip down to the examples here. I want to point out what I changed about this compared to before. So previously, we were showing like the breakdown of the revenues. I did break down a separate line for referendum property taxes compared to remaining property taxes, trying to separate out that referendum line, since that's what tables A, B, and C have different, okay? In addition, I would say that you'll notice on the state sources, the other line, the question was, where are the proceeds for the sale of this building projected? And so you'll see that under column 26-27 school year, as if there is a 270-day and then plus 45, you won't see that cash here in this fiscal year, right? So that is shown under the other column for 26-27. That's where it goes up to the 5.1 mil. And then it drops back down because that's a one-time money. Expenditures by department, you're going to find that I did not include on these lines presumed reductions because I can't tell you right now where those reductions are going to show exactly. That's yet to be determined. This is intending to give you like some rough numbers, and what was the purpose of these was for me to try and tell you how much of a reduction would be necessary on expenditures on an annual basis and still maintain 8% of unassigned fund balance, okay? So that was the goal of these projections, was to kind of give us a sense of that. So as you take a look at the prior year adjustments line that's in red, before the total expenditures, there's nothing there for 27, because 26 we're projecting, we're in that year, right? So 27 doesn't have any prior year adjustments there. But beginning in 28, you're seeing the amount of projected expenditures that otherwise is showing in the prior year under the net permanent adjustments to expenditures red line, okay? So, and it is cumulative under the prior year adjustments. So you can see under each scenario how much cumulative amount that is. The idea being that whatever reductions you're making for that 4.15 million in fiscal year 27's budget adjustments, that is going to be continuing into the FY 28 year as well. So that's the presumption. And then in the next year, if we're having to make $7.7 million in reductions, now you've got a cumulative effect in 29 of 11.85. Okay? So after the total expenditures, you've got a beginning fund balance. What's the net change in revenue compared to expenses? And then what does it take to keep that unassigned fund balance at 8%? And that's where those numbers were derived. I just kept plugging in numbers to try and get it as close to 8 as I could. You have your unassigned fund balance that we've calculated for the current year. We're using some assumptions then for like whatever's remaining then for 27, and then trying to think that that's gonna stay pretty stable moving forward. That is the amount that's necessary for the total fund balance to be at 8%, or the unassigned fund balance to be at 8%. Down below in the gray, you see the same number of expenditures that are under total expenditures, just shown in a different breakdown by salaries and benefits, purchase services versus it being by department, okay? I've gone through this one in detail. The others are very similar in nature, especially when you're looking at the expenditure side of things. What's different on B and C compared to A would be on the revenue side, okay? But the layout's very similar. And so if we skip on down in this document to the end, where there is a page where now you have A, B, and C, this is in summary form. Same information, but in summary form. So you have a one-pager to kind of work off from. And then lastly, we have the, straight from the model, the 4-year weighted average projections for enrollment by grade level. Keep in mind, I'm referring to K-12 in many of my conversations and in my discussion of those numbers, okay? So that's a summary of what we have here before you.
Thank you. Discussion, questions?
Just a couple like very detailed questions, and so you had mentioned the DSC sale, and I see if you go look on the other line, our revenue in 25, this year is 3.4 million, and you have it forecasted at 5 million, which is a difference of 1.6 million.
Yep.
But the building sale, we just approved a purchase agreement for 2.6 million. So where is that extra $1 million?
It's a reduction in other revenues. I'd have to look back to see exactly what's in the other column. I think it has to do with the fact that your 26 is going to be utilizing that which is current, and so you have some revenues that are, your budget doesn't always, your actuals can sometimes come in higher in the year it is, right, for other revenue, because that's like, what kinds of donations did you get? What kinds of miscellaneous revenue did you see? But when it comes to 26, 27, we bring that back to the budget amount, and it isn't impacted by like carryovers or other things happening, right? So I believe that that number is reduced, and I also believe that part of that reduction is some of the assumptions with regard to fees and things of that nature.
So $1 million is a lot of money. So I would like to know more about
Sure,
what
I can get that for you.
is made up of.
Yep.
And then why did federal funds go down by almost $500,000?
Because of carryovers not being included moving forward. So that's just going back to the initial allocation that we receive on an annual basis.
Okay.
When you don't spend it, the previous years.
I understand with grants and stuff, yeah.
Thank you.
I'm well aware. I think the revenue estimation is very conservative. I think when you look at the compound annual growth rate of what we've experienced for revenue in the past, I'd say 10 years, it's like 4.4%, and it looks like we're forecasting more like 1.5%. So I would just, I mean, I know we want to be conservative, but I think when it comes to our revenues, I think we're almost being too conservative about considering we got an additional $3 million of special ed this year. So I would just maybe challenge you to go back and take a look at that. And then, as far as expenditures, that's where I almost feel like we're not necessary, like, they might be a little bit too inflated. And I think, I understand forecasting is tricky, but I think one thing that, when you go back to, like I said, the 26, 27 referendum conversation, and one thing that we got criticized for and why we're in the position we are is that the forecasts for enrollment were too aggressive. And so I think it's really important as we go forward with this levy conversation to make sure that our forecasts are as accurate as possible. And I'm not saying they're not, but I think just really dialing into looking at the revenue, like I said, it's trended in the past higher, or, if you look at that compound annual growth rate. And then the expenditures have trended, I think are trending too aggressively as well. So that's just a little bit of feedback that I have on that.
Anyone else?
First of all, I want to thank you for making the adjustments to expenditures compounding, because when you do it year by year, it makes it look like it's just a one-time shot and then it just comes back. And obviously you can't bring it back unless you actually fund it again. The other thing I'd like to say is obviously our revenue is based upon enrollment and our enrollment's declining. If I may make a plug, obviously the formula needs to be redone. I would not like to see the legislature redo the formula. I would like to see superintendents, AMSD, all that actually come together to do that, and do that fairly quickly, because the whole state seems to be in this issue of declining revenue. The other thing that I want to challenge is that obviously we have a cross subsidy. So as our special ed needs grow, we're never being funded at 100% of that. We're always taking a hit out of the general fund in that cross subsidy. And with regards to estimates, my fear is that even though the state increased that, because the Fed never actually funded it as the largest unfunded mandate we've ever seen in education, I am worried that the state is going to reduce that in the next biennium, and we're assuming they're not. And that worries me, because I think that's going to further increase our expenditures compared to, and decrease our revenue, which is something that obviously we cannot afford. I would like to stay as conservative as possible in that area. Given our state funding right now, I don't see how they can actually increase that or even maintain that at that level, because they are making up for a federal mandate instead of just state. Hopefully that is some of the formulas that you are looking at as we go into this, not this year, obviously, but next year's biennium.
Thank you.
Yeah, I have several thoughts, and just based on community feedback and the finance committee meeting. Also, I really still feel like the expenses on here are still. I would urge us to really present, including some of the cuts that we've made over the last 14 months. I think that I just looked at 26, 27, because if you don't have a good starting point, the rest of the years, it doesn't matter. I look at this number and we're up 4.34 million more than we were 14 months ago, yet we've made $4.1 million worth of cuts, adding back transitions. We have closed a school, selling a building, and that savings range was 5.7 million. All that added up, we should have seen, a $12 to $14 million reduction in expenses, and higher. So it's very difficult, and I know there's inflation and benefits and other things going into that, but I don't feel like this reflects the cuts that we've made, and specifically in headcount. I know that might be hard to show, but showing this as a separate line item doesn't compound, because we're taking the same, for example, elementary, secondary, regular instruction bucket, we're adding the percent on it year over year and not taking that number down. So, you know, I struggle with some of that. I think, you know, when we talk about the levy, numbers should drive our levy ask, and, you know, it is a hard sell with $136 million worth of bond debt outstanding, to ask our community to, you know, keep that cost when we built buildings and additions and things that, you know, we don't currently need, even though it may be tax neutral. So we do need to keep that in mind. I think in regard to staffing, I hear the community, the parents, the teachers, staff, everyone talk about class sizes and all of the needs that they have. And what I have a really hard time reconciling that with is that if you look at our financial statement from 2018 to 2025, very similar enrollment counts. We have 60 more full-time employees than we did in 2015. So it's hard to reconcile that, and maybe we just don't have people in the right places, but I think this is a and ask. So yes, we can ask for more money, and we should be looking at, you know, our staffing and restructuring and what do we need to do. You know, maybe special ed is explainable, we have higher enrollment counts, but we have 21 additional admin and student support staff that consisted of 6 admin assistants, 7 supervisory coordinators, 3 counselors, 2.5 more social workers and psychologists for the same number of students. And that's really hard to understand as a community member. What are we doing wrong, right? So, and I agree, we do live in a tax-averse, you know, very financially conservative district, and the burden lies on our residents, and I think, you know, we should go out and ask our community because it's up to them. I'm not in favor of board renewal, but I think we need to optimize as well as asking for additional money, and I think that this forecast should reflect the cuts that we've made in those buckets, even if they're estimates, and we can denote that, because it's really hard to swallow this when it's, we've already taken so many measures that I don't feel like are reflected here. So, you know, that's my perspective. I think, you know, a few questions. Thank you for answering all of them that I sent via email. The one thing, I think there were a couple things that I still maybe had unanswered in regard to that. So I had asked about any sort of assumption around decreasing enrollment, and like, do we have any assumption built in for like 1 FTE per X students or something like that? I know that we don't know that number for the building closure specifically yet. I think it would be helpful to understand an estimate, but just generally over the next 5 years, is there any assumption we can make in our forecast to say, you know, if we lose 50 students, that's X head count? I don't know. Things like that need to be reflected in here.
If I may?
Yeah.
So the process being used, for example, in reviewing for 27 is to, particularly with the boundary changes, every single elementary student was identified by which school are they going to be attending based on boundaries, right? Every single, so we knew what every building was going to have for total enrollment. From there, we went through with our principals and how many sections does that necessarily mean? How did we determine that? Based on our targets, right? First, I asked, let's start with discussion caps. And they're like, no, that's too deep. I'm like, okay, we'll back off and do target, right? So that was how we determined, like, what's the FTE? Well, when you compare that to what we currently have, for example, that's kind of our starting point then. As you look at the number that is 4.15 million, that's going to be part of that number. So those types of conversations around 27 are going to be reflected in that number down below. I can't tell you exactly for sure that they're all going to land in the elementary and secondary regular instruction, or if it's gonna be, there's some that might be under special ed, there might be some that are under pupil support services. So therefore, I can't move that 4.15 to the above numbers until we know that information, right?
Yeah, no, I understand that. I think some sort of assumptions in there would be helpful, because again, right now, none of it's reflected.
But it is in the totals, so.
But from the bottom, but again, now you're compounding percentages on these staffing every year, and you haven't taken it off the top of that. In addition, we have declining enrollment, we're not reflecting. So I just think it's building on a higher number that, you know, out of gate, and it's really not reflective. And we saw this before, we asked the same question, we made $4.1 million worth of cuts, and it was like, our forecast is higher, our budget's higher, where did the money go, where did the cuts go? So I just am really struggling with that. It's not clear what we've reduced and where to put it. That's my feedback.
Can
That PDM. And then even like utilities, for example, so you took that out of the 25-26, was the increase, did you say, or the 26-27?
The current year's revised budget is, yes. And so as we talked about in revising that budget, we were adding the revenue from like special education, but we also noticed that the budget that had been in existence for the adopted 26 wasn't high enough to be reflective in certain areas that needed some adjustments. So those numbers may have shifted between transportation, utilities. Utilities wasn't much, but there was a slight adjustment. And I think the previous board meeting on the 12th had that list in detail, the same period that you approved the budget.
So like even that, we've closed a building now, where's the utility savings in here? You know, just, I don't know, I just don't see any of these cuts projected at all.
They're in the 4.15 million, yet to be determined exactly how that gets allocated.
And then, sorry, my last question, and again, I was just reviewing the financial report and caught my eye, but the debt structure in 2025, it looks like we paid 1.5 million of principal and all that, or is that common, or why do?
I'm not sure where you're coming from with that one.
Okay, I can send that as a follow-up.
Yeah,
I didn't know
let's,
if that was ever.
I'll look at that a little more detailed.
Okay, perfect.
Yep,
I think that's it, thank you.
you're welcome.
Anything else?
I just would like to add something that Director Mason said. Recently, you know, I've also been thinking a lot about budget challenges, and so I attended a workshop, and I wanted to share just a little bit of information about that with the board. And one of the topics was optimizing student to staff ratios. And since optimizing resources is part of our strategic plan and an expectation from our community, I thought it was relevant. And when you look at optimizing student to staff ratios, again, over time, our enrollment continues to decline. So if we lose 80 kids, is it fair to assume we need that extra bus? We need that extra administrative staff support. At some point, we have to look at those items as we lose students and determine, do we need staff, or do we need to readjust our staff to optimize our resources? And so I did a quick analysis of our district, and since 2014, we have seen a 14% change in student enrollment, but a 37% increase in staff FTE. And I think this goes back to what Director Mason was saying about the FTE, the 60 extra FTE. And so as we continue to review our 5-year forecast, keeping in mind what actions we've already taken to reduce expenses and optimizing resource by consolidating schools, moving min caps back to the high school, and we increased our classroom cap. It appears to me that there is still more work to be done to optimize our staffing models to align with our forecasted student enrollment. In this workshop that I attended, the recommendation was given to review all central office and administrative roles, keeping cuts as far away from the classroom as possible. This is something that I've been advocating for using a zero-based budgeting model. Funding classrooms first is how we need to build our budget. Based on our student-to-staff ratios and this 5-year forecast, it's clear to me that we have more work to do to optimize our staffing models. It really frustrates me to hear that we are at bare bones when our staffing to student ratios is so out of line. Bare bones to me would mean we've already adjusted our staffing models to align with the forecasted enrollment, and our total FTE would be closer to where we were in 2017 and 18 with that 60 reduction in FTE. I fully understand students their needs have changed, which is why we need to optimize our staff and make sure our staffing models align with our student needs in classrooms. A balanced budget this year was a great start, but now we really need to do more work to optimize our staffing models to account for declining enrollment, which means less central office staff and administrative staff are needed. I feel this is incredibly important to gain our community's vote as we get closer to determining the amount and the purpose of a future levy. So I just wanted to add that.
I have a question.
France?
A 37% increase in staff FTE, where did you get that number?
It's a year, I can send you the chart I use. There's a staffing model in this workshop that I attended, it has a staffing model. So you
But
put in,
didn't
you
get that
basically put in
from
the,
our finance director or Director Cothern.
I took all the numbers off of our annual report. And I did share them
I
actually,
think that it's
so. Mm-hmm.
important for us to make sure that information shared from the board table is actually from our district.
It was actually from our district, and so I took it from our annual reports.
But it's not information that all board members have here right now. So,
I'm happy to share it, so, with our
I'd
board.
like to have it delivered from our administration.
That's fine, I sent it in,
Because,
and I'm happy to have him share.
no,
Dr.
not from you, not from your graphs, but from our administration to back up those numbers.
That's fine, I'm
'Cause
happy to send it.
We've approved cuts every year since.
Understand, but our
if we can
FTE is
just-
still higher.
If we can
then it's
get
better.
back to what was on our agenda.
We're
the
talking
staffing-
about the 5-year forecast, yep.
Okay. We heard your points, thank you. And I will ask, is there any other discussion or points to be made on the budget projections? Hearing none, we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the superintendent evaluation and mid-year check-in. Dr. Thomas?
Sorry, Chair Bullion, like I shared earlier, at the close of this meeting, every year Martha will send out the link with the goals that were approved from last June. And then that window will be open for a week's period of time, and Dr. Zumbush will collate the qualitative responses. And then the chair has historically summarized those into some talking points for mid-year to the end of the year of some look-fors and areas for strengths and areas for opportunity.
Thank you. We have no policies at this
I have a
time.
question. So when the link goes out, what is our timeframe to reply?
Oh, sorry, it'll be a week.
Okay, 1 week, okay, good,
We'll
thank you.
we'll
And-
share that
It'll
too.
be,
Okay, and probably she's going to send it out tonight or tomorrow?
we'll effectively have it for tonight.
Okay, so the week starts tonight, I
Well,
just want to
we'll-
make sure.
We'll start the week tomorrow.
Okay, thank you.
I don't think any of you are doing anything tonight.
Okay.
Any other questions or comments on that item? All right, we have no policies at this time, and so with that, I move to adjourn at 10:18. Did you have something else? Okay.